The Tarak fleet arrived without warning, their massive warships breaking through the atmosphere like a dark storm of destruction. Towering vessels with sleek, deadly designs, each one capable of wiping out entire cities with a single strike. The humans on Earth stared in disbelief, their worst fears coming true. The Tarak, a race of highly advanced aliens, had been watching Earth for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They believed humans were weak, primitive, unworthy of even a second thought. The Tarak had never encountered a race so small and so seemingly incapable of defending themselves. In their eyes, Earth was nothing more than a speck of dust, unimportant and ripe for conquest. The first signs of their arrival were subtle at first, whispers of strange signals and the odd disruption in communication systems. But soon the skies darkened with the shadow of their ships, blocking out the sun in some areas, and in the blink of an eye, humanity was no longer alone in the universe. As the alien fleet made its way into Earth's orbit, the people of Earth were left in a state of panic and confusion. Military forces scrambled to respond, but they knew deep down that their efforts might be futile. Earth's most advanced weapons, their most powerful missiles, and their cutting-edge defense systems seemed nothing more than toys in the face of such overwhelming force. The first attack came quickly, a coordinated wave of energy beams fired from the alien ships. They cut through Earth's military defense systems like a hot knife through butter. The human soldiers, armed with everything they had, fired back, but their weapons had no effect. Nothing could pierce the shields of the Tarak vessels. The world's leaders watched in horror as the first cities began to burn, reduced to rubble in seconds. As they tried to launch counterattacks, their weapons barely scratched the surface of the alien ships. The Tarak didn't even bother to respond. Why would they? Humans were weak, their resistance meaningless. With each blast, the hope of humanity began to fade. Panic spread across the globe like wildfire. People ran for shelter, unsure of what to do or where to go. Governments crumbled, communication between nations faltered, and the world seemed to be on the brink of annihilation. As humanity faced its darkest hour, many questioned if there was any way out. Were the legends of human resilience true, or had they simply been stories passed down through generations? The Tarak had calculated that it would take no more than a few days to wipe out Earth's military and enslave the planet. They underestimated the human spirit, but they did not yet know that. Across the planet, as the bombs rained down and the firestorms spread, a quiet determination began to stir in the hearts of the people. But in those first moments, as humanity watched the destruction unfold, fear took root. The Tarak didn't need to invade with armies on the ground. They could simply obliterate everything from orbit. It was clear that Earth's leaders had miscalculated. The invasion had started far too soon, and now the planet faced its possible extinction. Yet in the midst of all this chaos, a strange glimmer of hope began to emerge. Unbeknownst to the invaders, there was something hidden deep beneath Earth's surface. Something far older and more powerful than anyone realized. Something that could change the course of the invasion. But for now, the people of Earth had to face the terrifying reality that their world was being destroyed, and they were powerless to stop it. The Tarak fleet hovered above, watching, waiting, as Earth's last defenses crumbled. The true test of humanity's strength was only just beginning, but no one could see that yet. All they could do was brace themselves for what was to come, knowing that survival seemed almost impossible. The aliens had underestimated them, but would that make any difference? The battle for Earth had just begun, and the outcome was uncertain. As the Tarak fleet continued to dominate Earth's skies, its soldiers descending like shadows upon the helpless cities, humanity's survival seemed all but certain to end in failure. The Earth trembled beneath their invaders' onslaught, and hope seemed a distant, unreachable memory. While the world's leaders scrambled to form a resistance, somewhere deep beneath the surface of the planet, a small group of scientists, working in secret, had stumbled upon something no one could have ever predicted: ancient artifacts that seemed to defy the known laws of time and technology. Buried for millennia, hidden from human eyes, These relics were the remnants of a civilization long forgotten, a civilization far more advanced than even the Tarok could imagine. The discovery was accidental. An old, buried research facility had been uncovered during an excavation for a new mining project. It was a small operation, tucked away in an isolated part of the planet, where few dared to venture. But as the excavation team dug deeper, strange objects began to surface, objects that shimmered with an eerie light and pulsed with energy. It didn't take long for the scientists to realize that these were no ordinary artifacts. They were crafted from materials unknown to modern science, designed with a level of sophistication far beyond anything humanity had ever achieved. The researchers were stunned. They had no idea how these objects had been buried beneath the earth for so long or who had created them. But as they carefully analyzed the artifacts, they discovered something that shook them to their core. These were not just remnants of an advanced civilization. They were tools, weapons, and technology left behind by a forgotten human empire. A human empire that had once ruled the stars. At first, the idea seemed impossible. How could humans, primitive as they were now, have once commanded such power? Yet, as they began to decode the artifacts, the truth became clear. Thousands of years ago, long before recorded history, humanity had mastered space travel, and not just the ability to travel between planets, but the technology to destroy entire fleets, entire worlds, with ease. These ancient humans had built weapons capable of wiping out the most powerful alien fleets with a single shot. The Tarok, with all their advanced technology, were not the first race to underestimate humanity's potential. They simply didn't know the truth of Earth's forgotten past. The scientists realized the importance of their discovery. The ancient artifacts held the keys to an unimaginable power that could tip the scales of the war in humanity's favor. They quickly shared their findings with the resistance leaders, who saw the potential to turn the tide against the seemingly unstoppable Tarok. But as word of the discovery spread, the scientists knew that time was not on their side. The Tarok would never know what hit them, but the human resistance had to move quickly. The ancient technology had to be unlocked, decoded, and put into action before it was too late. With the world's remaining leaders now fully aware of the truth, a plan was set into motion, a desperate, high-risk effort to recover and harness the power of this long-lost technology. Across the globe, scientists worked tirelessly, deciphering the alien-like blueprints etched into the artifacts, and engineers struggled to adapt the ancient machines for modern use. As the human resistance prepared for what they hoped would be their final stand, something remarkable happened. The hope that had been nearly extinguished now began to spark again. Humanity, once on the brink of annihilation, suddenly saw the faintest glimmer of victory. The ancient weapons were powerful, more powerful than anything the Tarok had ever encountered. And as the final preparations for battle began, the countdown to humanity's last chance at survival started ticking. The world was holding its breath. What would happen when the Tarok's overwhelming force collided with the forgotten power of Earth's lost empire? Would the humans finally be able to rise up against their alien oppressors, or would the secret of their ancient past prove to be nothing more than a fleeting dream? The resistance, with newfound hope and the ancient technology in their hands, knew one thing for certain: their fight was far from over. The battle for Earth was just beginning. The Tarok invasion had seemed unstoppable, their massive fleet dominating Earth's skies with terrifying ease. But hidden beneath the surface of humanity's desperate fight, something incredible was happening. The scientists, now working in secret with military leaders, had spent weeks experimenting with the newly discovered ancient technology. The task was enormous, the stakes higher than anyone had ever imagined. Yet, as the days dragged on, they started to make progress, small, tentative steps toward understanding the power that lay dormant within the artifacts. The technology, though complex and mysterious, began to reveal its secrets. After long hours of research, one of the most daring and dangerous plans was set into motion. The scientists had designed a prototype weapon using the ancient blueprints, a weapon that could harness the devastating power of the lost human empire. The test was risky, and the chances of success were slim, but the time for waiting had passed. If humanity was to survive, they had to strike back. The target was a smaller Turok ship, one that had been hovering above the planet, seemingly indifferent to the destruction below. It was just one ship, far from the heart of the Turok fleet, but it was enough to test the prototype, a pulse beam capable of cutting through nearly any material known to man. The resistance forces, their hearts racing with both fear and hope, lined up the weapon. A single shot would have to be enough. The countdown began, and all eyes were on the target. There was no room for error. The Turok, confident in their dominance, had no reason to expect the humans could pose any real threat. To them, the small, primitive race was already on the brink of extinction. A single human weapon, they believed, would be no more than a pathetic, futile attempt at defiance. They were wrong. The weapon hummed to life, its energy building, a low vibration that seemed to echo through the air as it powered up. Then, with a sudden flash of blinding light, the beam shot forward. It traveled faster than the eye could see, a brilliant streak of energy cutting through the darkness of space. In an instant, it hit the alien ship. Its shields had no chance. The ship, once a towering symbol of the Turok's might, was torn apart in a single devastating explosion. A wave of energy rippled outward from the explosion, shaking the ground beneath the human forces. The shockwave traveled through their ranks, rattling them, but in a way they had never expected. The first victory, against all odds, had been achieved. The aliens were stunned. Their ship, their technology, was destroyed in a single strike. For the first time since the invasion began, a flicker of doubt crossed the minds of the Turok commanders. How could this be? The humans were nothing, weak, insignificant, but now they had destroyed one of their ships. It didn't make sense. Panic spread through the Turok ranks like wildfire. Could the humans have access to a power greater than they had believed? Were they capable of more than just desperate resistance? The shock of losing even a single ship sent ripples through the Turok fleet. As their commanders scrambled to understand what had happened, the human resistance felt a spark of hope igniting among them. The once overwhelming feeling of helplessness began to fade. The humans had proven in one single moment that they were not as weak as the Turok had believed. The victory, though small, had shattered the illusion of invincibility the aliens had so confidently worn. In the days that followed, the human forces began to rally, emboldened by the success. They were no longer just surviving, they were fighting back. The first strike had ignited a flame of rebellion across the planet. It was only a small victory, but to the humans, it was the first real sign that they could fight and possibly win. The Turok had underestimated them, and now they knew that humanity was far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. What had begun as a desperate, hopeless fight was now something far more dangerous to the invaders. The humans were not finished. The war had only just begun. With the unexpected victory over the Turok fleet, humanity's spirits were lifted from the depths of despair to the heights of defiance. The first strike had proven the impossible. Humans could not only survive, but strike back with devastating force. The resistance, now emboldened by the newfound hope, quickly regrouped and began to plan a larger, more daring offensive. They had access to the ancient technology, powerful weapons that had been buried beneath the Earth's surface for millennia, and they weren't about to let it go to waste. The scientists and engineers worked around the clock, adapting the alien-like blueprints and refining the weapons that had torn apart the first Turok ship. Soon, humanity was ready for a full-scale counterattack. But the Turok, arrogantly believing the first victory to be a mere fluke, underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. The alien commanders, in their confidence, made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the humans' will to survive. As the Turok regrouped, thinking they could easily crush the resistance, the humans launched their retaliation. In the dark void of space, the battle began anew. This time, however, the humans were no longer the helpless prey. Their new weapons, now perfected and fully operational, were unleashed with precision. A massive pulse beam shot across the sky, striking a Tarok warship with deadly accuracy. The ship's massive shields flickered for an instant before the beam sliced through, obliterating the vessel in a single blinding flash of light. The Tarok was stunned. The humans had not only survived, they were fighting back with overwhelming force. As the first ship fell, the human forces didn't hesitate. They hit another target with the same deadly precision, wiping out a second alien ship in a matter of seconds. The Tarok commanders, who had once believed the humans to be weak and disorganized, now faced the full fury of humanity's newfound power. Panic began to spread throughout the Tarok fleet. Their confidence wavered as they realized that the humans were no longer the insignificant race they had once believed. Every ship they lost, every battle they failed to win, added to the growing legend of humanity's resilience and ingenuity. The Tarok were no longer in control. The invaders' fleet, once so vast and intimidating, was now taking heavy losses, each blow striking deeper at their morale. The humans, using their advanced weapons and clever tactics, adapted quickly. They didn't rely on brute force alone. They were agile, unpredictable, and fought like a wounded animal cornered and desperate. The Tarok had no idea how to respond. Their fleet, though still powerful, was now severely outmatched. What was supposed to be a quick victory for the Tarok was turning into a brutal fight for survival. The alien commanders scrambled to regroup, sending out more ships, but every wave of reinforcements was met with more human resistance, stronger and more prepared than before. With each battle, the Tarok fleet began to shrink, their ships vanishing into the abyss of space, shattered by human firepower. A deep fear began to settle into the hearts of the Tarok. Their calculations had been wrong. They had assumed that humanity was a fragile species, doomed to collapse under the weight of their advanced technology. But what they failed to account for was the human spirit, resilient, adaptable, and unyielding in the face of annihilation. As the Tarok fleet reeled from the unexpected reversal, they realized the true extent of their mistake. Humanity was not weak. They were a force to be reckoned with. The aliens had come to conquer, to crush the human race beneath their heel, but instead, they were now fighting a war they had never intended to face. Every lost ship, every destroyed warship, was a testament to humanity's strength, and with each victory, the human resistance grew bolder, more daring. The Tarok commanders, now filled with dread, knew they were no longer facing an easy conquest. They were up against a species that would fight to the very end. The humans had proven they were far from powerless, and now the invaders were the ones who feared their enemy. The Tarok fleet, once so confident in their overwhelming power, now found themselves teetering on the edge of defeat. The humans, using the newly discovered technology and their raw ingenuity, had become a formidable force, capable of destroying entire ships in seconds. The Tarok commanders, who had once laughed at the thought of a small, primitive species like humanity putting up a fight, were now faced with a grim reality. Their underestimation of the human race had led them into a desperate situation. Panic spread through the ranks of the Tarok as their fleet continued to shrink with each passing day. The once unstoppable armada was now a shadow of its former self, and the humans, emboldened by their victories, were relentless. Realizing their mistake, the Tarok decided to make a desperate push to turn the tide. They scrambled to deploy their most powerful warships, each one a behemoth of destruction, hoping that their sheer size and firepower could crush the human resistance once and for all. Alongside the massive ships, they also sent out their deadliest soldiers, genetically engineered warriors, trained for the sole purpose of exterminating the weak. The Tarok believed that by overwhelming humanity with their strongest forces, they could finally break the human spirit and bring the war to a swift and brutal end. However, the Tarok were again blinded by their arrogance. Their most powerful ships, though fearsome in appearance, were slow, unwieldy, and unable to match the speed and agility of the human forces. The humans, now well coordinated and experienced in battle, easily outmaneuvered the bulky Turok warships, striking from unexpected angles with pinpoint precision. Every move the Turok made seemed to play into the hands of the human resistance. The Turok commanders, realizing their forces were being outclassed at every turn, began to make increasingly reckless decisions. Desperation gripped their minds as they threw more and more of their remaining fleet into what appeared to be a final doomed assault. They launched wave after wave of attacks, hoping to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. But every time they tried, the humans struck back with deadly efficiency, crippling entire fleets in mere moments. The Turok were no longer thinking strategically, they were reacting out of panic, throwing their resources into an attack they knew deep down had little chance of success. The humans, however, had learned from their previous battles. They were no longer fighting with desperation, they were fighting with purpose. Their tactics were flawless, their strikes carefully calculated. With each successful attack, the human forces grew bolder, more confident, and more lethal. Key Turok fleets were crippled in quick succession, leaving the invaders with fewer and fewer options. The once imposing Turok warships were now falling faster than they could be replaced. The human resistance knew they had reached a critical point. They had turned the tide of the war, and now they were poised to finish what they had started. As the Turok scrambled to reorganize and rethink their strategy, it became clear that their time was running out. Their arrogance had led them to underestimate humanity, and now their desperation was only accelerating their downfall. The human forces, using their newfound technology and unwavering determination, had become an unstoppable force in their own right. The Turok, realizing too late the full extent of their mistake, began to understand that this wasn't just a war for Earth, it was a battle for survival. They had underestimated humanity's strength, and in doing so, had set the stage for their own destruction. The war was no longer in their favor, and with each passing day, the Turok's desperate attempts to regain control only brought them closer to the inevitable, their defeat at the hands of the human race. The war between humanity and the Turok had reached its boiling point. The Turok, having thrown everything they had into the fight, were now preparing for their final, all-out assault. Their ultimate fleet, a monstrous assembly of warships, was massive beyond comprehension. This was to be their last, decisive strike, one that would obliterate the human resistance once and for all. Thousands of ships, each brimming with Turok soldiers and weapons, moved into position, surrounding Earth from all directions. The commanders of the Turok fleet were confident that this final push would end the war. They believed the humans were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, and their technology could not possibly match the full force of the Turok Empire. But they had underestimated one crucial thing: the humans had been preparing for this moment. The Resistance, now fully aware of their capabilities, had been working in secret for weeks, studying the ancient artifacts and refining their understanding of the power they had discovered. Using a combination of this ancient technology and guerrilla tactics, humanity had planned the perfect counterattack. They knew the Turok would come at them with everything they had left, so the humans had spent countless hours positioning their forces in the most strategic locations. Every ship, every weapon, every maneuver was calculated. The humans had learned to fight like shadows, using speed, unpredictability, and precise strikes to wear down the Turok fleet, one ship at a time. As the Turok's enormous fleet moved into position, ready to strike, the human forces were poised for battle. The skies above Earth were filled with the hum of engines and the gleam of weapons, but the human resistance remained calm, focused. They knew that the moment of truth had arrived. The first wave of the Turok assault came crashing down, their massive ships cutting through space with terrifying force. The humans held their ground, launching their advanced weaponry in well-timed volleys that cracked the alien ships open like fragile eggs. The Turok, caught off guard by the sudden ferocity of the human defense, struggled to maintain their momentum. Ships fell from the sky, burning bright as they were torn apart by the deadly human weapons. But the Turok weren't done yet. They pushed forward, desperate to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. The battle intensified, the skies above Earth becoming a chaotic battlefield. a swirling mass of laser fire, explosions, and dying ships. It seemed as if the human resistance was fighting a losing battle, but they held firm. The humans had something the Tarak didn't: determination. Then, as the tide of battle raged on, the human forces activated their final weapon, a new experimental pulse blast that had been built using the advanced technology found in the ancient artifacts. This weapon had the potential to turn the tide of the entire war, but it was still largely untested. There was no going back. The resistance leaders gave the order, and with a flash of light that seemed to freeze time, the pulse blast was unleashed. The shockwave spread outward, a ripple in the fabric of space itself, and as it reached the Tarak fleet, everything changed. In an instant, the Tarak ships, which had seemed invincible just moments ago, shattered like glass. The pulse blast sent shockwaves through their hulls, tearing them apart with brutal force. The Tarak, unprepared for such an overwhelming assault, watched in horror as their fleet crumbled under the immense power of humanity's new weapon. Ships exploded in spectacular displays of light and energy, their wreckage scattering through space like falling stars. The Tarak commanders, once so confident in their inevitable victory, now found themselves scattered and broken, their forces disintegrating in seconds. The final battle had lasted mere minutes. The once immense Tarak fleet was now nothing more than a cloud of debris, floating silently through the cold void of space. The few surviving ships, battered and broken, fled in all directions, their captains too terrified to face the consequences of their defeat. The humans, standing victorious, looked out across the battlefield. They had not only survived, they had triumphed. The Tarak, once seen as an unstoppable force, were no more. The battle was over, and Earth had won. The human resistance, using their cunning, their bravery, and the power of a forgotten empire, had destroyed the Tarak fleet in seconds. In the aftermath of the final battle, as humanity celebrated their victory, they knew that they had proven something far greater than just survival. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was a force that could never be underestimated. The war had ended. The once feared Tarak fleet, shattered beyond recognition, lay in ruins, drifting silently through space. Earth had emerged victorious, but the cost of the battle was far more than just the loss of life. It was the loss of the Tarak's arrogance and underestimation of humanity. The humans had not only survived their invasion, they had proven their strength, their resourcefulness, and their incredible potential in ways the invaders had never even dreamed of. The surviving Tarak forces, broken and demoralized, retreated from Earth's orbit. Their once imposing fleet was now a distant memory, scattered across the universe in defeat. The invaders, who had believed they could easily crush humanity under their boot, now fled in shame, humiliated by the fierce resistance they had faced. Their pride had cost them everything. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth began the slow but determined process of rebuilding. The cities that had once been reduced to rubble slowly came back to life. The human spirit, that was scarred by the war, was stronger than ever. The people who had fought so desperately now looked forward, no longer just trying to survive, but eager to rebuild and thrive. Humanity had discovered a power within themselves they never knew existed, and they were determined to use it to restore their world. But the rebuilding of Earth was just the beginning. As the humans uncovered more and more about that ancient history, they began to realize that their potential was far beyond what they had once imagined. The technology they had discovered, the forgotten artifacts from a lost empire, had unlocked doors to vast knowledge and capabilities. The humans weren't just survivors, they were the heirs of a spacefaring race, one that had once commanded the stars. They had the tools and the wisdom to go beyond their home world. The universe, which had once viewed humanity as insignificant, would soon realize that the human race was no longer confined to Earth. With the ancient technology now in their grasp, humanity set its sights on the stars. They were no longer an isolated species, but a rising power capable of reaching the farthest corners of the galaxy. The Tarak, who had seen themselves as the dominant force in the universe, were now aware of humanity's true strength. The war was over, but the message had been sent. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The invaders' arrogance had led to their downfall, and the survivors of the Tarak forces would never forget the sheer power and resilience they had encountered on Earth. They had thought they could crush humanity. They had thought humans were nothing more than a primitive, helpless species. But now the Tarak knew better. They knew that the human race was far more than they had ever imagined. Earth had not only survived an invasion, it had proven that no force in the universe could ever break the spirit of humanity. As the humans looked to the future, they knew that this victory was just the beginning. Their place in the stars, once a distant dream, was now within their reach. The Tarok were no longer the dominant power in the galaxy. The humans had taken their place, and with it, they carried a lesson that the universe would never forget. The human race was here to stay.